Hi, my name is Jonathan Standing. I'm a freelance concept artist and illustrator. This tutorial is for ImagineFX issue 118, and the question is, how do I paint a fleet of spaceships without painting each ship individually? Kind of how do I get a bunch of variety in a bunch of designs without sort of necessarily making the effort of designing each element individually. So I think there's a whole bunch of ways that you could approach this digitally. I'm making this work in Photoshop CS4. Basically what I've done here is I've made myself a base spacecraft that exists on a separate layer. I've not put a huge amount of thought into the design here. I don't really have kind of a theme or anything, but I have kind of a series of shapes and panels that kind of give the design a sort of overall aesthetic or flavour, if you like. And what I'm doing now in a series of separate layers is building additional parts that I think fit into that general aesthetic or shape language, if you will. Even though it's fairly undefined, it doesn't really have a lot of meaning. There's still kind of a lot of repetitive ideas and shapes in there, and I'm trying to repeat them and reflect them in these individual pieces, which I'm going to use to kind of kit bash a bunch of designs together. I've sort of cheated a little bit and made life easier for myself by drawing all of these ships orthographically. That is to say that I've drawn them all from the side. For the image to be more effective, I think it would be advantageous if the ships were in 3/4, or had some kind of perspective applied to them. I think there's a way to kind of, you can definitely apply this same method that I'm using here. It might be ever so slightly more labour intensive to make these modular pieces fit onto ships in perspective, but it's a good way to still kind of generate a bunch of variety in your designs. So here I'm just saving out the file, and I've got my selection of modular pieces, and here I'm going to duplicate the ship and said pieces into 4 instances of the ship. And then what I do is just take those individual pieces, in that case I duplicated them, change the shape of them, the scale of them, and just kind of move them around to different places on the design where it feels like they fit, where they add something different to the overall quality of the design, to try and change the silhouette of the ship. Everybody knows, I'm sure, that the silhouette, the outside shape of a design is what the eye reads first. So if you're trying to sort of pump variety into the silhouette before anything else, you're always going to kind of maximize the amount of difference that you get between these designs if you're thinking kind of silhouette first. So I've used these different pieces in different ways in these different designs, using them as kind of wings or flaps or goodness knows what. The variety here in terms of silhouette, now that I'm kind of looking at it after the fact, I sort of wish I'd pushed it a little bit further. I think you can use this technique to achieve that. But overall, what I've got here are 4 ships now that have differences between them that are sufficient to make them feel like they're different spacecraft, but also that they have enough similarities in terms of shape that they feel like they belong to one another. So now what I'm doing is I'm introducing some multiply layers over top of my sort of modular pieces to make the lighting that's applied to them fit with the rest of the design, just so they feel a little bit less kind of tacked on. I think that's really important when you're using this technique, so that it doesn't feel like you're Frankensteining these designs together. You have to kind of take the time after the fact to blend some of that, some of those joins together, so that these pieces do actually look like they're part of the same structure, that they do belong together, and they haven't just kind of been bolted on after the fact, which is exactly what has happened. But one of the great things about Photoshop is that you have all of these transparency layers kind of at your disposal to tweak the value of these components to try and make them feel like they belong to the design. That's another reason why kind of making sure that your modular pieces, when you make them, if you try and give them a hard edge so that they make a nice selection for you, what I'm doing here is I'm selecting the contents of the layer when I have one of my modular pieces, and then painting in the multiply layer over top. Because I have those nice solid edges, I don't get a lot of fuzziness or kind of pixelation to the information that I lay down afterwards. So at this point, I think the vast majority of the additional information feels like it's been kind of blended into the ship designs. And here I'm just trying to further sort of differentiate the ships from one another by introducing some sort of paint jobs or color schemes to the outside of the ship, just so each one kind of gets assigned its own color. And I'm trying to apply the color in sort of different ways. And actually, looking back on this now, I wish the way I had applied the color was sort of more radically different in each case. I think the color is different in each case, but the application of color, even though it's not verbatim because the ships are different shapes, philosophically it's very, very similar. And so I think as kind of the color schemes appear, you'll kind of see that that's the case. So what happened there was my computer, in its wisdom, let Photoshop crash, so I lost that color information. So here I'm just trying to reintroduce it to the ships. Try and vaguely remember what I did the last time. I really couldn't remember. I tried to improve on what I'd done the time before, and I think actually second time around was ever so slightly more successful. So the video that we've been watching so far has been 8 times normal speed. 4 times normal speed. This is now 8 times normal speed. The reason why I've sped it up is what we're looking at is not, it's not the most kind of interesting sort of component of the tutorial, I think, in that what I'm doing here is just so obvious. I'm just painting in different color schemes onto these ships just to try and further the difference between them. I wish that the application of, or the design of the color was sort of more different for each of them. Really what I've done is just kind of pick a different color for each one and then put it in slightly different places on the ship. But I think if given kind of a second chance at this, I think I probably could have pushed the differences between them a little bit more. They're not horrible by any stretch of the imagination, but they don't move the needle as much as I would have liked. I think that the application of color to the bottom right design ends up being the most interesting, just because it makes a material change to the function of the ship. The top right hand portion of the nose, which right now reads like it's some kind of armor plating part of the hull, because I changed the value of it so much, it becomes so dark, it starts to read as the cockpit. And so just by changing the color scheme, I made kind of a material change to the design, which I think is kind of cool. So I don't mind that one. But yeah, the other ones probably could have used a bit more thought. Here I'm introducing some text to the bottom right hand design. It's very much sort of low hanging fruit to put text or numbers on the side of a spaceship. I think there's a bunch of artists who do a really good job with that kind of idea. I think if I was using this technique for designing a series of ships and I was putting a lot more time and thought into it, what I would try and generate is some kind of meaningful group of two-dimensional decals that I could apply to the different ships. So whether it's a 1940s pinup a la Liberty Bell to stick on the side of an aircraft, or whether it's shark teeth to go on the bottom of the nose, if you develop a library of two-dimensional images, you get to kind of play in the sandbox of introducing those designs in different ways, which can yield some really cool results. So what I've done here is just kind of amalgamated the layers of the different ships to turn them into separate objects, if you will. And I'm trying to arrange them here in some way that makes them look as if they're all flying together through space. And I've dumped in a really cheap background with some stars that I applied a motion blur to just to give it some movement. I actually found it really hard. Like, I don't think that the shape of the canvas kind of lends itself that well to this kind of composition. And also, if I was doing this commercially, I definitely wouldn't be presenting these designs kind of orthographically. I'd be showing them much more in kind of three-dimensional space, so they're like zooming towards you or zooming away from you. It's so static the way that I have them made right now, but it's kind of a question of convenience more than anything else. Here I'm using a multiply layer just to kind of add an additional group of shadows to each of the ships, just to try and make them feel like they're floating in this galactic sort of background. And here I'm just having fun with just kind of shooting future blue space stuff out of the back of each ship. Who knows what this sort of propulsion is. I mean, I have no idea, but I think it adds a certain je ne sais quoi to the image. I was having fun with it when I made it anyway. I think the overall effect is, when you compile these things together, that they do look like individual ships, but the amount of effort or sort of time that went into designing each one was greatly reduced by sort of making it in this kit bashing modular kind of way, where I was adding pieces to change the shape, the silhouette, and then changing the color scheme of it. So even though maybe it doesn't net you quite the same results as really kind of meticulously going in and designing each ship individually, you can quickly generate that variety. If you are pressed for time, it's certainly helpful anyway. And I think if you were sort of like less timid than I was with the shapes that you use as kind of your modular pieces, there is definitely the potential to really push this technique to generate a bunch of really cool designs that, even though they feel like they're different, they feel related to one another, which is sometimes one of the hardest things to do in concept art, is make things feel like they belong to the same world. And this technique's very efficient, but it also kind of lends to that consistency of shape and language that makes things feel like they belong together. The only trick is to push the modular designs enough so that they don't feel like they're just versions of the same design. They do feel like actually separate and distinct designs. Here I'm just trying to make the front ship feel like it's moving a little bit, and we're pretty much done. Well, I hope that was useful. Thank you very much for listening.